Here's a clip from Tarabuster with Tara Devlin.
Well, you're looking good there, Tom. So thank you so much for taking the time. I just, I read your book again, and I was just telling everybody that we will know this country's on the right track when the Hidden History series is included as required reading for every student in high school. I believe. I mean, this is such a great, concise background on the real history of American democracy. Now, what when you say the hidden history, what do you mean about hidden history of American democracy?
Well, there's a lot about our system and about our history that is shrouded in mythology or is literally unknown, or where people believe things that simply aren't true. So I wanted to clear a lot of that stuff.
Yes. Well, I love the way you connect it to the Native Americans, and you bring in Karl Marx and the Enlightenment, of course. But all of when you say Karl Marx, of course, that's very triggering to some people. But it really is all.
Remember Marx being in the book?
Yeah, well, yeah, he's in there because you talk about where is it? I have it written down. Look on page.
There it is, 39. Page
Yes,
30.
that's right. And Karl Marx and where? Hold on.
Oh, I was noting that Karl Marx
Yes.
Engels had written that he had followed the teachings of the Native Americans.
That's right. Yeah, the Karl Marx acquired and read a copy of Lewis Henry Morgan's 1877 Ancient Society, and that was yes. So and you connected it to the the Enlightenment thinkers, Rousseau, Locke, and of course these were the inspirations for Jefferson and Adams. And a lot of people don't really know this. This is why I think it's yet again another important book, but. Because one of the things that I know, as far as Republicans are concerned, they talk about how the country was founded in Judeo-Christian values. And what do you think about that?
No, it wasn't. The founders were clear about this. There were kind of fundamentalist whack jobs among the founders. Probably the best well-known is Patrick Henry, the guy who said, "Give me life or give me death." He was the largest slave owner in the state of Virginia. He owned over 360 human beings, and was a brutal slave master. He was also an evangelical fundamentalist Christian who did not like the Constitution, argued against the Constitution at the Virginia Ratifying Convention. He was the reason why James Madison changed the Second Amendment to change the word nation to the word state to protect the Virginia Slave Patrol, Patrick Henry's demand. But he was kind of an outlier. Many of the other founders were like Jefferson and Washington were deists, or were agnostic, or many of them were Christians, but they just really believed that government and the church needed to be separate. John Adams, for example, when Jefferson wrote the Declaration of Independence, and this goes back to my riff about nature, about democracy being natural for us and all animal species. But when Jefferson wrote the first draft of the Declaration of Independence, he's got, for the life, liberty, and pursuit of happiness, basically this is ordained by nature's God, right? Nature's God. And John Adams goes in and scratches out nature's God and writes in Christian God. And then Jefferson scratches out Christian God and writes in nature's God, which is where it stays. So, but Adams, who went to church sometimes 2 or 3 times a week and took notes, and James Madison, who was Jefferson's protege, and Adams, of course, Jefferson was his vice president, and then they ran against each other in 1800. They were emphatic that they did not want the government involved in religion or religion involved in government. And in the case of Adams and Madison, it was because they wanted their faith to be pure. They didn't want their church corrupted by government. When Madison became president in 1809, the first piece of legislation that he vetoed, one of the few that he vetoed in his entire terms as president, was a bill that George Washington had started a poorhouse in Washington, D.C. that was paid for with federal money that provided housing, medical care, food, and clothing to poor people, and or to the truly indigent. And throughout the Washington and Adams administrations, this was, and Jefferson administration, this was funded directly by the government. There was a minor religious revival in America around 1810, and so this bill came to Madison that said that they were going to give the federal money to a local church, and the church would run it, a faith-based initiative.
Right.
And the father of the Constitution, James Madison, wrote a veto in which he said this would be establishing a terrible precedent for the nation, bad for the church, it would be bad for the country, and it's a violation of the Constitution.
Right, because they wouldn't want to escape or fight a revolution against a government that was entwined with the church and an intergenerational aristocracy, just to recreate that here.
And you had the Church of England, was one and the same as the British government. The Queen was the head of the Church of England.
Right.
So, the same deal. Jefferson was convinced that if a priest, which was the term he used, it was kind of generic for ministers of any kind, if a priest ever became president, the republic was doomed. Madison's protege didn't think that was a legitimate concern. He was more concerned that if the government ever started giving money to or dictating the terms of religion, that religion would be doomed.
Right.
And they had this dialogue going on about this for 30 years, and it turns out they were both right.
Right, that's so true. But I feel like we're totally getting away from for the most part, people don't really understand that this government was founded in the liberal age of enlightenment as the antidote to the kind of system that ruled Western civilization for 2,000 years. The intergenerational aristocracy, where the rich run and own everything and everybody else is in their place, their natural place, like the king, right? And I feel like this is what the right-wingers, they're rebuilding this here at home. Of course, with, mom and apple pie, while waving the flag and all that. And I know that you share my concerns about this time that we live in, but I mean, what do you? I mean, how are you feeling today? I know I wax and wane about it too. Sometimes I'm very hopeful. I feel like it's always darkest before the dawn, but God help us, really, if Trump gets back in, let's say, I just don't know if we can survive. It's really, this country's young. It's less than 250 years old, and this is the grand experiment, and it feels really sad that it seems to be slipping away. So, and I think it does begin with people not really understanding the true history. That's another thing. I wish that this book was required reading in high schools, in the very least, because we don't really share a common history, it feels to me. Yeah.
I agree, which is unfortunate. In terms of what I think or feel about the future, I think that yesterday or the day before, when Trump was at his most recent rally, he made the comment that this will be the final battle. This election of 2024 is going to be the final opportunity to, in his worldview or statement, to fix America. I would say, the opposite, the final battle to save America.
Wow.
His point was that he realizes, and I think I really think it's true, he realizes that the jig is up with the GOP.
Right.
You've got an entire generation coming up that is not buying their BS, whether it's their climate change stuff or their, give tax cuts to billionaires and it'll trickle down on all of us BS, or the, trashing the rights of women or going after the queer community, whatever it be. There's a whole generation coming up looking at that and going, this is total BS. We want nothing to do with this. So the Republicans see that coming. They also realize that there's a lot of pissed off women out there. And then on top of that, you've got the boomers, my generation, are also starting to wake up in a big way, because it's so clear that the Republicans want to gut Social Security and Medicare. And
Right.
so, they've managed to piss off everybody. About the
Right.
only people who are still with them are millennials and Gen Xers who are so busy trying to raise families and keep their head above water that they don't have time to tune into politics. They're not paying attention to what's going on,
Right.
which
Right.
is a normal thing for that generational cohort between roughly 30 and 60 or 25 and 55. They tend not to be as political as the people on the young and the old end because they just, they're so wrapped up in life, right?
Right.
In the busyness of life. But and then on top of that, you've got the racial demographic change that is happening in the United States. But I think the big one is the generational one. We're getting about 10 million new Gen Zers every year. I think. No, it can't be that many. I read it in the New York Times today, and I'm sorry.
Right. Yeah,
I don't want
that's
to quote a
okay.
number. I'm not sure of it, but it's some huge number of of Zoomers
Yes.
are aging into the over 18 voting population, and at the same time about half that number of boomers are dying out, which is
Right.
the Fox News generation. So I think that if we can make it through this election of 2024,
Yeah.
and ideally if we can make it through in a big way and seize enough power to actually right the ship, as it were, and if the first legislation out of the gate in 2025 is to make voting an absolute right, which will shatter the power of at least half the red states administrations, and then strip money out of politics, which will shatter the power of the whole Koch network and all those guys. If we can roll back those two elements, we can put this country back together and make it work really well, and we can join all the rest of the developed countries in the world that have national health care systems and free college education and a large population that is unionized.
Right.
I mean, these are not radical ideas.
No.
Literally every other democracy on earth has these as central pillars of their democracy, and we don't have any of them. We've got 35 million people who have no health insurance. We've got 200 million people who are underinsured, or 170 or whatever the numbers. We've got $2 trillion worth of student debt that is just crushing an entire generation of people. I mean, no other country has these problems, and they are brought to you 100% by Republican politicians who've been bought and paid for by right-wing billionaires. That's it.
Yep. Yep. And it's just I feel that the younger generation, because they've grown up in a very small world because of the internet, they see they're not susceptible to the lies as maybe my generation was, or earlier, or older generations, because they see that other countries have universal health care. Like, we stand alone here. They have friends in other countries that they talk to on Zoom and whatnot, and they see that we're the only country that doesn't have any sick leave or vacation time, at all. We have no vacation, nothing. We don't have the freedom to be human here,
Unless you're rich.
Right, unless you're rich.
That's the giant caveat. That's where the Republican Party lives, is they only look out for the interests of people who are, over $1 million a year. That's their base.
Right.
Their real base. I mean, that's where their money comes from. That's where their power comes from. And then basically, the rest of their base, the lower middle class suckers who vote for them. That's just a scam that the GOP has been for about 4 decades.
Exactly. But it's just that's why they appeal to their bigotries. And I mean, it's just so clear. That's all they have. Yeah. This anti-trans, this whole, and it's really alarming, the anti-trans stuff. And I've heard you talk about it on your show too. It's right out of the Nazi playbook. I mean, there is no getting around it. That's how the Nazis, they targeted.
That's how they started.
Yeah, that's how they started.
Literally started. I mean, they had been talking about Jews for a long time, but when it came to actual persecution, the Nazis started with trans people. And trans people, they went to gay people, gays and lesbians. And then from there, they started on the religious minorities and racial.
Right. It was all about protecting the children, too. I mean, this is what's so chilling.
There's a movie about this out. Have you seen it?
I haven't seen it, but it's in my queue. It's called...
It's called El Dorado. It's an hour-and-a-half documentary on Netflix, and it is, and they show the historical footage and then they cut away to scenes where actors are playing the roles of the people in the history,
Right.
and fully accurate scenes, and so you really get to see how Germany changed in that period from 1933 with the rise of Hitler until the end of the war,
Right.
and through the eyes of this gay nightclub, the El Dorado.
Right. Oh wow. Yeah. Yeah, we've talked about it on the show how because there was a gay center in
That was it.
Berlin.
El
Yeah.
Dorado.
Yeah.
And there was a scientific center that was
Right.
associated with it too.
Yeah,
And
and
the
they
guy,
would gender
the same guy owned
studies. Right. And they did gender
they did
affirming
the first
care.
surgery.
Yeah.
And they were and they were providing normal stuff, venereal counseling and abortions and childbirth.
Right. Wow. Yeah. I mean, Berlin was a beacon of progressivism, and that's
Roaring 20s, yeah, and into the early 30s, yeah, actually right
wow.
up to 1933 when Hitler took over, and then he put an end to all that, like that.
Yeah, yeah, and that is that is another history that is kind of like the hidden history because people really don't know about that. That's why it's really good that that documentary exists on Netflix, and especially it's incredibly relevant. Which I mean, especially when I was reading your book too, I was like, this is such a relevant book right now. Because one of the things I talk about on my show too is that is the problem that we don't have a common history here. We don't seem to share, and that's part of what Republicans, they talk about government schools, and they don't want us to have a common history. But how do you have a country if you don't have a common history?
Yeah, I don't recall who it was who said it, but he who controls or they who control the past control the present, and those who control the present control the future. I guess that's
right.
And so the first step is controlling the past, and controlling the past means controlling the schools.
Yes.
That's why you see these billionaires funding these programs with these right-wing moms and whatnot, who are attempting to control our schools and change our history. I don't know if you saw this, but in Florida now, it was just up tonight in the news. The state board of education or whatever is going to be requiring history teachers in Florida elementary schools to teach children that there was a benefit to slavery. The slaves learned.
No, are you kidding me? This is an abomination. There's a benefit to slavery.
To the slaves. The slaves.
Oh, well, that is what
enslaved people.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that's really the perspective of what the slave owners would say. Of course, they were teaching people. It's the same old racist trope that Republicans use now when they talk about welfare. Not so ironically, they talk about the dignity of work, teaching people the dignity of work, and that's the same thing that they would say about enslaving people. They had to teach black people, of course, because otherwise they would hang around and do nothing. It's the same it's the same racist trope they use about welfare, putting aside the fact that, as a percentage, more white people are on welfare than people of color, but okay, that doesn't, facts have a liberal bias, so we don't really need to worry about it. But you know what I mean? It's just they rehash the same racist tropes, and now, I mean, just hearing this, it's stunning to me. I don't even know why. It's like the guy who was caught on tape recently. I can't remember what state, saying that the Tulsa race riots, the race massacre, wasn't, don't teach that it was about race, which, I mean, I guess the shining light is that is the overarching feeling is that yes, they are ridiculous. They sound ridiculous, and it highlights it even more than we could even highlight it just by talking about it. They really are showing who they are, and like you're saying about young people, the young people aren't buying this no matter what. It's like the last gasp of a like the horror, the creature in the horror movie. You know, you think he's dead and then he comes back up. You know, that's what it feels like. But you know, hopefully, I mean, legally and peacefully, we can like stomp him down. But I just think, wow, what a, you know, I mean, it could really go either way. You know, something because I love history too, like you, and I especially have always studied the history of World War II and the rise of Nazis, and it's really chilling, you know, to see how we are at this crossroads here. And one good thing, though, is that you could hear on the regular mainstream media, they're talking about it too, which is actually a good thing. Which, you know, for years they would never say the word fascism at all. And now, you know, the media pundits like Joy Reid and whatnot, they're talking about it openly, that's good. But yeah, I mean, we're living in very interesting times, that's for sure. And so let me see. When I wrote down some questions here, but it doesn't really matter. I know you only have 30 minutes. So it says, what challenges do you foresee in revitalizing democracy in America, and how do you propose overcoming them? That's a good one.
Well, I think the challenge that we face is the structural challenge that the Republicans have erected. They've made it really hard to vote in the blue cities that are located within red states, and that's having a national influence. They're purging voters off the voting rolls to the tunes of millions a year, mostly in blue cities and red states. They're changing the rules around voting to make it harder for working people to vote. I mean, who can stand in line for 6 hours?
Right.
And you know, that is probably going to be the major impediment, because those laws are not going to go away. In fact, the Supreme Court has reaffirmed. And in 2018, the Supreme Court reaffirmed the ability of John Husted in Ohio, the Secretary of State there, to just like purge people from voting rolls. All he was mail out a postcard to them, and he can he's mailing it to it. You can just take the registered Democrats, you know, and just or you know, in this, it looked like at the time he was doing it mostly into black neighborhoods. And he mails a postcard in, and either if they don't send the postcard back, or if they fail to send the postcard back, depending on the type of postcard, they get dropped off the voting rolls. And there's be, you know, 10, 20, 30, 40% of people who, even if the postcard was great and it said, if you don't send this back in giant letters, right to vote. But instead they make it look like junk mail. So it's like a 50% lack of return rate. So literally, you send that out to 2 million people, and suddenly you've got the ability to pull 1 million people off the perfectly legally with the approval of the Supreme Court. And they're doing it, like I said, to the tune of $1 million or million voters a year.
So what is the rationale from the Supreme Court? Do you know what they said?
That states get to make their own rules with regard to elections, which is what it says in the Constitution.
But I mean, for years that's voter caging, and that was illegal. And
Alito actually, you'll see this in the article that I'm publishing tomorrow on HartmannReport.com. Actually, Alito in that decision, I quote from that decision, that Supreme Court decision, and Alito in that decision pointed out that there are millions and millions of Americans who are registered to vote in more than one state, and used that as the justification to allow Husted to what he was doing in Ohio. Now, the fact of the matter is there are millions of people who are registered to vote in multiple states. In the last 10 years, I lived in Vermont, I've lived in Oregon, and I moved to Oregon, then I went back to Washington, D.C. and lived there, and then I came back to Oregon. I didn't notify any one of those three states that I had arrived or I had left for voting purposes. I simply never voted more than one place. It's normal. 7% of Americans move every year. It's absolutely normal that people are registered in more than one state. What's abnormal is that they try to vote in both those states. That just doesn't happen.
Exactly.
I mean, they are able to identify maybe 20 or 30 cases a year of people who do that kind of fraud. Nobody does that. So
Exactly.
it was a non-problem, but for Alito, it was enough of a
Ugh.
justification to allow Ohio to go ahead and purge 1 million people off the voting rolls in Cincinnati and Toledo.
Right. It's like, as if you're gonna get on a plane and fly back to Washington or something, and or D.C. And
Yeah,
I
typically when
mean,
it's done with a mail-in ballot, but say, people
right.
just do it.
True.
I
True.
mean, nobody, first off, nobody thinks their vote is that important. It's like,
Right.
I risk
Right.
going to jail for one friggin' vote. It's like,
Right. I mean, and that's the thing. When there is voter fraud, it's, generally people are caught, and there's repercussions, and it's
there's
never
penalties.
anything that's going to tip the election.
And ironically, what we've seen in the last 4 years is that most of the voter fraud that gets caught I mean, like over
That's right.
80% of it is Republicans. And
Exactly.
the reason why they're doing it is because the party has convinced them that everybody
Yes.
else is.
That's
They're
right.
so convinced that Democrats are regularly and routinely committing voter fraud that they assume that there's no penalty to it and no
Mhm.
risk to it.
It's
And hey,
true.
everybody's doing it, so they just go ahead and do it. And in fact, no Democrats are doing this, or very
Mhm.
few.
It's true.
And frankly, most Republicans are not doing this. It's just,
Right.
like you said, 20, 30 people a
Yeah.
year get
And they're all
this.
from the villages.
Yeah.
Right. It's true though. Many of them are from the villages. But
Oh,
that's
there
the
was 6 or 7 of them from the villages.
yeah,
You're
but
that one retired
definitely.
community that's
But that's
mostly
what you're
Trump. Yeah.
saying. No, you're right, 100%. They're doing it because they're being told that
That's
it's
been their
so
defense in
rampant.
a couple of cases that have come to trial. Is they've
Wow.
literally their defense has been, well, a lot of Democrats are doing this. Why am
Wow.
I arrested?
Wow. I mean, you think these people are ever going to wake up? I wonder.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean,
I think that there's a gradual awakening kind of washing over the GOP, and this is why, although you see these numbers like Trump's popularity with the Republicans, and it's getting higher and higher, and oh my God, well,
right.
the fact is the Republican Party is shrinking. The
Yeah.
number of people who will identify publicly as Republicans and the number of people who are registered as Republicans is shrinking, both those
Right.
numbers.
Right.
And so when you get a smaller pie, a slice that has the same amount of blueberries in it is now a
Yeah.
bigger piece of the pie. It looks like it's bigger relative to the pie because the pie's getting smaller.
Right.
So, that's what's going on. It's not
Right.
that Trump is becoming popular. He's just more popular with Republicans
That's
because
right.
the rational Republicans are leaving
Yeah,
or have
that's
left.
true. That's true. If you have any shred of integrity, I think you've already gone. Yeah, that's true. How could you stay? I mean, if the Democratic Party was turning into what the Republican Party is, we'd be gone.
Yeah.
But so, Tom, I have to thank you yet again. I want to thank you for coming on the show. This
My pleasure.
show.
Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you for your amazing hidden history series. And I mean, I learned so much from your books and your show every single day, and I just, I'm glad that we're both at the barricades together. Trying
Yeah.
to make this country work for all, I suppose. But thank you so much, really. And
Tara, thanks so much for inviting me on your program. I really appreciate it.
I'll talk to you soon. Thank you.